What's up, everybody? It's Greg Birch with Delta Financial, and this is the Be the Difference podcast. This podcast is all about making you a better person in your life and in your business with coaching on sales, leadership, mindset, marketing, everything under the sun when it comes to being an entrepreneur. And we bring on guest speakers. Today, I've got the honor and pleasure of welcoming my good buddy, Mr. Kevin Vega. So, Kevin, today, actually, we're going to go over a really dope topic. One of my favorite topics, actually, because it's from one of my favorite authors and probably one of my spirit animals, Mr. Simon Sinek. And that is what, Kevin?
It is about the infinite game.
Yes, the infinite game. So you're probably thinking, like, what is the infinite game? So you can define, there's finite games and there's infinite games. What's a finite game?
A finite game is like a sport, like so many millions of people watch. Take football, right? Football, there are teams that participate and compete against each other, and there's a set established rules that everybody that participates in that game agrees upon. They agree that a foul is a foul, a penalty is a penalty, that a score is a score, and at the end of it, somebody wins by accruing the most points.
Yeah. So it's basically got a start and an end point. It has a known amount of players entering into the game.
Yep.
Predetermined rules. And at the end point, there will be a winner.
That is correct.
What's an infinite game?
An infinite game is the complete opposite of that. You have no idea who's participating. You have no idea what the rules are. There's no agreed upon rules from the participants that you do know. And it goes on forever until you or the organization that you're with no longer has the resources or will to continue playing.
Yeah. And that is the only rule. There's only one rule to an infinite game, and that is to stay in the game as long as you possibly can. So it's really you versus you. Now, there are other people in the game playing in the game. So by definition, business has been around for forever, really. And
since the caveman days.
Yeah. There's been, in a sense, been businesses. There's been an exchange of services for currency or services for other services. Yeah. So the game of business has always been around. So the point in the game of business is that there is no winning. There is no best. There is just trying to stay in the game as long as you humanly possibly can with that before you run out of the resources or the will to play the game. So now, why is that important to these agents, to the audience?
Well, it's vastly important because a lot of people get caught up measuring your success using finite rules and not really understanding that if you're doing this, you're doing it for the long run. It's just like life. There's no necessarily winning or losing to life. There are things that you can have, but when it comes to purpose and fulfillment, is there really an answer, something that's measurable? So, for instance, Simon Sinek gives an example about a married couple. And I think it was Tom Bilyeu's podcast that he was on, and he asked him, he said, so, you're married. At what point did you fall in love with your wife? Do you know? How did you measure that? There are things that, even in business, that you can't necessarily measure. And when we talk about being and continuing in this infinite game, it's, are you doing everything to maintain your resources and your willpower? And it kind of ties into our career school, which is why we train so much on mindset in this industry. Yeah. Why is that?
Mindset and fundamentals. Well, I think that there's a key thing that you want to understand when it comes to understanding the infinite game is that problems arise when you try to play the finite game, a finite player versus an infinite player, right? If you try to play the infinite game by finite rules, that's where you're going to have issues because you think that you're going to win, and there is no winning in business. There is no best in business. What are the predetermined rules? It's like, well, we're the best business. We're the best insurance company in the market. Best by what? the most revenue, the most agents, the most agent satisfaction, the best leads? How is it determined? Is it the most pickups, the client pickups whenever you're dialing? Is it the most sales? Is it the most ROI? What is your metrics? And did we agree upon these metrics whenever you set them? We did not. So there is no such thing as a best, right? You have to look at it just from a standpoint of how do we get better than ourselves every single day, right? As a business, this is where we're currently at, and this is where we want to be. And how are we getting to that next level constantly, right? When it comes to the career school, the reason why I focus on mindset is because and also the fundamentals of sales, the real fundamentals of sales that people don't teach, the scheduling, the tracking your numbers, the goal setting, the training daily, those things that really matter that you have to do no matter what, but people neglect for whatever reason, because it's nothing sexy about it, but that's what's going to take you to the next level. Those are the things that are going to get you from point A to point B, right? And having the right mindset along the way of a growth mindset that you're always improving, because everyone's potential is unknown and unlimited. And that's the point. It doesn't end. If you're always trying to improve, if you're always pushing yourself, if you're always tracking your metrics and then setting goals further and further out that stretch you continuously, you should always be in a state of discomfort when you're an entrepreneur. You should always be pushing yourself. It should always be uncomfortable. The second you get comfortable is the second you stop going forward. And the second you stop going forward, that means you're in a rut. And the difference between a rut and a grave is just the depth of the hole. And so you should always be pushing yourself as an entrepreneur, no matter what industry you're in. Whether you're in insurance, whether you're a salesperson in a different organization, it doesn't matter. You have to be constantly looking at an infinite game style of growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Because growth is just the constant pursuit of progress and achieving progress. A good example of this is when the United States started expanding out west, right? Mm-hmm. Progress was how much track did they lay that week, that month. The only way that track is laid is through hard labor and hard work.
Yeah.
They'd stop at a certain point, lay so much track, move the caravan forward, and do it all over again. And they did this for years until they achieved the result was connecting civilization at that time all the way out to California. But did it stop there? No. Those organizations transitioned into a different market of business, but they still progressed. And that's the point.
And to bring it back to another point, this is for an example so that you guys can understand the difference between a finite player and an infinite player and trying to play the same game. Vietnam War is a perfect example of a finite versus an infinite player. The U.S. was trying to win. The Viet Cong were fighting for their lives. What's the difference there, right? So the Viet Cong were playing an infinite game. They were playing forever. The U.S. was just playing to win, which is why we ended up pulling out.
Yep.
We played until we lost the will and the resources to continue the game. And so that's what you have to keep in mind is like examples like that. The other example is that if you keep an infinite mindset, it doesn't matter what your competitors are doing. Like, it's good to understand what the competitors are doing, but you don't base decisions based off of them. A great example is Apple versus Microsoft, right? Simon Sinek gives a talk where he talks about, and even in the book, An Infinite Game, he talks about an example of when he went to a Microsoft conference and he spoke because he does coaching, executive level coaching. And then he went to an Apple conference and he spoke. And he said at the Microsoft conference, 70% of the speeches that were given were how to beat Apple. He said the Apple conference, 100% of the speeches were given how to make their products better for teachers and for students, to help teachers teach better and help students learn better. And look at the difference, right? And then he said he was, leaving that Apple conference, and he got into a taxi cab, and he's sitting in the taxi cab. He's sharing it with like this Apple executive number 13, like kind of just random Apple executive. And he was like, I'm going to rock the boat a little bit. And so now this is back in the day, if you remember the Zunes, right? And he had just gotten the Zune. Now the Zune, when it was made, was actually a far superior product to the Apple iPod. It was far superior. It was sleeker, it was sexier, it was faster, it looked better, it played better, but it had a problem, had a flaw. Everybody used iTunes at the time, and it did not compute with iTunes. And so that's one of the reasons that it failed, neither here nor there. But he was given a Zune at the previous Microsoft conference that he went to. And he looks at this Apple executive, and he was like, hey, I got this new Zune. It's sleek, it's sexy, it's so much better than the iPod I had previously. Like, this is a beautiful piece of equipment. And he's sitting there just like bragging about this Microsoft product. And the Apple executive looks at him and says, I have no doubt.
Done.
Conversation over. Done. Now, if he'd have done that with an Apple product to a Microsoft executive, they'd have been like, oh, let me see it. Let's dissect this. Let's look at it. Let's see how we make it better, blah, blah, blah. And they would have like went up in arms trying to compete to win. Apple's not trying to compete with Microsoft. They're competing with themselves, which is why they're such an industry leader and why they have the branding that they have. And so that's a more of a macro scale. That's on a business to business, massive businesses that we're talking about. But you can apply this even as an individual 1099 entrepreneur, 1099 self-employed worker, right? Don't compare your performance to somebody else's performance. Don't compare yourself to, well, if they can do it, I can do it. I mean, that's a nice thing to kind of say to yourself that might drive you. But what if they don't do it? Does that mean you can't do it? No, you're not them. They're not you. There's no reason to let that hinder you. You should only be worried about you and keeping yourself in the game, which means every single day doing the actions you need to do in order to be the best version of yourself and in order to take yourself one step further, 2 steps further every single day, right? I saw a comparison. I was reading a book yesterday, and it was like, you have to, every single day you have to improve, or at least try to stay steady and not go backwards, right? And this, I'll use in terms of habits. So let's say that you have a habit, you have a really, really good habit, and you're doing, every single time that you disregard that habit and you do a bad habit instead, you go backwards, right? Now, if you were to gain 50% from your habit, let's just use numbers. You had 100 and you gained 50%. Now you're at 150 because of your good habit. Now, let's say the next day that you go backwards a little bit and you're like, well, it's okay. And you go back 33%. Well, what are you at? You're back at 100. So that means you actually have to gain exponentially more than what you go backwards on in order to stay ahead. And you have to keep that in mind. Like, even if you just stayed put, you stay at that 150, that's great, right? Because you're not going backwards. But you have to start looking at creating good habits, getting rid of bad habits, and being the best version so that you're always staying in the game as long as possible. And that's really the name of the game.
100%. I mean, when you look at, going back to your example about comparing yourself to another agent, yeah, you see this top producer, they're killing it, they're posting numbers, and you say, man, I want to do that. You're not really ever going to truly know what that person does every single moment of every single day in order to get that. You won't know the history of what they had to go through. The only thing that you can focus on are the daily activities and fundamentals that you're employing and training on every day to be better than you were yesterday, last week, last month. You have to focus inward and voluntarily accept that responsibility, that you are accountable to yourself and your results. There are other people that are going to help you get there in Delta, in the industry. It doesn't matter. You can find the right people to connect with. But it all comes down to what are you going to do about it and how are you going to achieve it?
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, this has been an awesome chat. One of my favorite. I love the Infinite Game. If you want to learn more about the Infinite Game, then you can go check out Simon Sinek and any of his podcast forums. He has a lot of TED Talks that he does. He does a TED Talk about the Infinite Game. He also has a book called The Infinite Game. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend that you read it. All of his books are great. Leaders Eat Last.
Start with Why.
Start with Why. Find Your Why. Infinite Game. They're all fantastic books. Highly recommend them. Kevin, if anyone wants to contact you, what's the best way?
You can catch me on Instagram at kvega86. Send me a DM. I'm always on there trying to post content, good content for everybody in the industry on leadership, sales, operations, processes, all that stuff. Or you can send me an email, kvega@deltafinanciallife.com.
Absolutely. Hey, guys, thank you so much for taking part in the Be the Difference podcast. If you watched until now, then I know you got some damn value. So do me a favor. Do me a favor. I need your help. I need your help to share this content. We spread and we grow by word of mouth, by you guys sharing this content with other people. You could send a text link. You could share it to your story. You could talk about what you learned, something that you took away, but help us to grow. And also do me a favor, go onto the Apple Podcast website and give us a 5-star review. Talk about what you're picking up from the content that we're providing. We do this for free. We're just trying to provide value to everybody in the industry and also in any kind of entrepreneurial position, sales, leadership, mindset, anything. And we're here for you. So all I ask is that you do a value-based exchange and you help us as well. This has been the Be the Difference podcast. As always, I'm your host, Greg Birch. Until next time.